So we all know, thank you, Caterina, for the introduction, and priest Richard for having me, and for letting me share part of my story. Is I think I'm only 42. I mean, I've still probably have a long journey to go through, and every single time there's always going to be trials and tribulations along the way that's going to help us form our faith to endure and get it stronger and stronger throughout our lives. So I would like to kind of focus on one specific story I had, I mean, from plenty of others that where I encounter like today's Father's Day. I'm the oldest of three, and my father at the time, I always looked up to him as like my father figure. He helped me learn how to ride a bicycle. He helped me kind of do typical Dominican meals, when my mom had to work, and he helped me enrich myself in culture with music or history through Discovery Channel or the History Channel and whatnot. But later down in life, like every human is, we're flawed. But me as a child per se, you put your parents like you idolize them. Although the scripture says it's never good to idolize people. I mean, because we're all flawed. But my dad, we grew up and lived in New York City. Then we moved to Dominican Republic. So in Dominican Republic, things kind of got a little bit kind of convoluted. So my dad kind of got into politics, and my mom was really not into it. So kind of my dad committed adultery in the meantime while he was in there. So, as I always hold in esteem family values, and of course, I always dreamt to have my family as a whole unity, to come back to my childhood house and be able to come with my own family, which I do not have at age 42, and spend time with my family and cook with them and share stories about our journey, about our travels and whatnot. But that story actually is not mine. And never and to be like that. So my parents, kind of divorced, and it was a really murky divorce. Sadly, I was in my last year of medical school when that took place. You always think that it doesn't matter if you're younger or older when your parents divorce. I mean, you think that age would kind of have influence if the way you endure that situation. But for me, it was kind of hard because I was having a lot of pressure and stress through to perform adequately in my last year of medical school. I couldn't work, so I was just studying 10 hours a day, 10 to 12 hours a day, and then had to repeat the same things. My parents divorced, and I always blamed my dad during that time because of the divorce, because my parents had to split. My mom took off with just two luggages, and my brother and my sister flee the country to New York City from Dominican Republic, left me behind because I was in medical school and I did not want to leave my career because I that's what I so wanted to accomplish. Like both of my parents were not university educated. I wanted to be the first one to kind of be able to achieve that high merit. And yeah, so being with my dad in the same household, I had a lot of resentment. I did not look to him like I looked to him when I was 7. I was like, because of you, you tore my family apart and you didn't know how to keep it together. So something that I was sharing with Ekaterina was the story of the prodigal son. And something that also I hold faith with, because during my childhood, besides books were always my thing. I always resonated to books and music to kind of fill my solace because I always felt different than my other family members. So I kind of trained myself uh, to kind of endure certain situations. I mean, for some other people will see, oh, besides my parents divorcing, there was more to it. He was a little bit violent and aggressive and drunk most of the time. Well, so the person that I grew up with during my childhood was not the same during my university years. So the story about the prodigal son, what I was trying to relate with was that, you know, the son had money and he left the country, I mean, left the city to just embrace and enjoy and do debauchery. So I kind of correlated with my dad in that sense, because my dad at the time, you know, he was well off. He was in a different freedom state. So I kind of put myself in a position to see my dad through the father that kind of forgave the son when he came back, and say, you know, we're all flawed, we're human, and we're not perfect. So after a year of not speaking with my dad, living in the same household, and I graduated, I came to a realization that I'm like, you know what, this is not good for me, for my soul, for me to harbor so much grief and pain. You know, like my dad, I know he was enduring whatever challenges he was going through, and I know it affected me and affected my brothers and sister and my mom as well, mentally, physically, and spiritually. But at the same time, it was like an eye opener that I'm like, okay, I'm gonna be the bigger person here, and you know, and just forgive my dad. And I had to kind of coach my mom to do the same, and my brothers and sister, because they were younger. But it was a hard kind of time, because there was like a transition of everything, like my family all falling apart. The values that I always held up to were not there present. So that being said, yeah. So from that, what I say is to hold about faith and pursue things with love. You kind of develop more growth within yourself spiritually. So things that helped me were to read the scripture and to listen to music and work out and go to nature. Those were the ways I kind of manage all that. Um, but is there anything that you guys would like to share that you kind of correlate with me in that sense? I know there was a lot.
What helped you reaffirm your faith, Wendy, when the times were at their toughest, when things seemed so dark? How did you hold on to that belief and
Reading the scripture. Reading scripture, like it was my, yeah, it was my Bible. I read because I would cry by myself in my room, lock myself after, you know, studying for 10 to 12 hours in the university, in the hospital, dealing with patients, dealing with the bullying in school too, because I also had that. My boyfriend had left the country. My mom, my sister, and my brother had fled the country. So I was by myself, and my daughter and I, my father and I were not in speaking terms, so I recurred to the Bible. And besides the Bible, I went off a little bit out of the train wreck. I kind of started partying, I started drinking a lot, and it was just a lot going on because I didn't know how to manage it. But I always pull myself to my faith through the Bible. Because I'm like, okay, I know I'm partying, I know I'm drinking, but this is not going to be healthy long term for me. But it was always that back and forth. Yeah.
and have you forgiven your father
Oh, yeah.
now? Has the relationship changed for you since then?
Oh, it's been, I mean, thank God. I prayed that my parents could be in the same household and I could be able to cater for brunch. Like for my 40th birthday, I had my dad and my mom in the same living space, but I like family members and friends were asked, how did you do that? I'm like, well, simple. I prayed. I put it out there. I said, I really would like, I know I don't have the household the same way, but wherever we are, I would like to bring them as a unity, as a core value. I want to be able to enjoy my parents no matter where we are, you know, have a good time together. And so luckily it has happened. So yeah.
Let me just add,
Yeah.
I was very struck by your story when you first shared with me, particularly around Father's Day, right? So I've also experienced a difficult relationship with my biological father. And what you shared with me really helped me release some of that resentment that I cooped up, and that made me feel physically as well as emotionally not at my best. And you being a professional in public health, you also shared something else with me, which is you've noticed through your research that it really affects your body and your mind if you hold on to that. So can you share a little bit as to what you found in your professional realm about people who hold on to that trauma?
Well, that's a great point. I mean, I did research at Columbia for 5 years, and specific were geriatrics ICU survivors. So I noticed from the different realms, some people that tend to harbor resentment, guilt, or shame with whoever family member or their spouse or their kids tend to kind of manifest ailments in their body. So I've read books even about Carolyn Miss. I don't know if you've heard of her. She's from the 60s, 70s. She was a journalist, and she did research on this to this day. I think she's now 75, stating that, that most people, chronic illnesses, either systemic lupus or things that you would never have a treatment for, when they have gone through the resolvement of pains from their past ancestors, they kind of resolved. And so besides the research I've done, I kind of did correlations with what she did also throughout her years. I mean, she's older, mature, more experienced than me. I noticed that people that kind of release those guilt, the shame, and harbor hatred towards anyone, that could, that could harbor and manifest in your body. So I highly recommend forgiveness for Father's Day with whoever you have. Father is like, you consider it to be our foundation, our strength, a person that you consider like, someone, a warrior, right? So sometimes when you don't see him in that light, it's like shattering, and you're like, what this? But at the same time, it's like you got to see him as a person that's flawed just like us, like anyone. We're sinners. We're not perfect. However, that's why you need to see it from their perspective, and forgive them and send love as much as possible.
One last question I'll have for you, and then maybe turn it over to others. As a result of forgiveness, have you found that release for yourself in your own physical body, in your mind, in your life?
Oh, too much. I used to have a lot of anxiety. I had plenty of anxiety, chest pains since a young kid. Because my dad was always, drinking on the weekends, and I just didn't like the yelling. So that, I absorbed it. And my mom used to notice it. She's like, "You're really sensitive." I'm like, "Yeah, I just absorb energy." And sometimes since a young age, I'm happy being by myself. And I found like a solace, a peace with my music, walking through nature. I don't feel that anxiety. But when I lived in New York, I had plenty. So I've noticed the difference from the transition of living in Manhattan, which is the crazy jungle, and being out here in Miami, luckily now South Beach, because I would never recommend that to anyone. I call it purgatory. Just being close to the water, it is. Just being close to the water and being around trees and birds and just seeing the ebbs and flows of the waves kind of help. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I want to see, so if others have questions for Wendy, and maybe you would like to share a spiritual experience or a situation that led to spiritual growth for you. So anyone have
in the public
questions?
I just have a quick question before others jump in with theirs, and that is, first of all, thank you for sharing. It's a very powerful story. There's no way that kids can't put their parents on
Yeah.
pedestals because it's natural, and that's all. That's devastating when parents fail, and like all human beings fail. But it's really tough for kids because
Yeah.
we need somebody to look up to. So it's a very powerful story. What I was struck with, there's one moment in the story where you say, I decided to be the bigger person. So, in a
Yeah.
way, you were intuiting this. The reality is that when we hold on to hatred, we're going to refuse to forgive. We're going to show them we can't forgive them because they're bad, and it would be approving of them if we did forgive. All these reasons. But there's a moment in your life where something snapped. You
Mm-hmm.
weren't talking to him, you were living with him.
Yep. It was.
And what do you attribute, like, and maybe was it spiritual? What was that moment when you said, I've got to let this go, I've got to be the bigger person? How did you break
Well,
the cycle?
my grandmother, his mother was a super Christian, spiritual woman. And she, every time, every Sunday, I always swing by to her and I, tell her, she knows my dad, it's her son. And she knew
Hmm.
the household that he grew up. So she was the one that kind of helped me navigate those hurts and aches and pains. And she's like, don't worry, he has a soul, he has a heart, but you're gonna have to just show him that to him. And I'm like, oh, okay. So yeah, she kind of trained me to like let it be. And my mother's mother as well was the same. Domestic violence in the family, both of them. But that's what kind of made them grow. They're like, I know I can't act. Both of my grandfathers died at 60 something because they were alcoholics, cirrhosis, you name it. Yeah, and my grandmas had to be the person to say, as the faith that they had, they were like, I need to let it be and teach that to my my family, my sons, my daughters, your grandkids. So my grandma kind of had an influence in that.
So she taught you, and then you were able to teach everybody else.
Yeah. My
Did
mom,
had,
my brother, my sister.
and
Yeah.
and how do you respond to when people say, when you forgive somebody in a situation like this, you're actually approving of what they did? You're like you're
Enabling.
saying
Yeah.
it's enabling. How do you respond to that? Because you also see that in the medical world.
Oh, yes. And I also partake on a gala. It's focused on domestic violence. So, I mean, in that sense, I say like change your perspective and see it for your own self because you feel it. Like when you lead by love, you won't see it as that, that dichotomy of seeing it that bad. You're seeing it in a different light, not seeing it in a dark light and being the victim instead of changing it, shifting it to be victor and saying, no, I'm gonna own my power. I know this is what happened to me, but it's not gonna be my story along the way, I'm gonna use it for good and to share that to others. Yeah,
That's awesome. That's
yeah.
great advice. Um, Anybody else with questions or comments? Power of forgiveness.
Anyone?
I have a question. Did your faith grow stronger in the process, or so was your faith an outcome of this difficult period in your life, or um, was it something that really helped you grow in the moment?
I'll
Did you
be
have this kind of faith before you experienced this challenging period in your life?
I had it and then I lost it. I did have a period at post-divorce because more stuff happened, that I was like, why? Like, when would I see the light? Besides forgiving and forgetting my dad, certain challenges came about unrelated to that. So it seems like I was also in my spiritual journey, but I was in a dark place. And it took me 3 years to kind of just like snap out of it. But that was part of the one of it to kind of regrew my faith again, because there was more challenges afterwards. Yeah. Me moving to New York with $100 in my pocket, with just, bare stuff, essentials, trying to make it by myself. And yeah, it's the jungle. So there was also stuff that kind of helped me grow my faith while being there, but it was dark as well. So it was like, okay, this is just a passing time. The storm, once after the storm, things, I always kind of said that to myself. I'm like, while I was studying for my boards, when I was making scrap of money, leading 3 jobs while trying to study at the same time, relationships not working. I shared with you in the car some other stuff that happened, and it's like, okay. But yeah, it was dark, and then I was like, okay, but snap out of it. This is not the end game. This is just part of the peak. And I always kind of try to rephrase that to myself. Like, this is just a testing time. It's not the end game,
It's process.
Everything's a process. And I know for a fact I'm 42, and this is just the beginning. Like, and like they say, sometimes the best is yet to come, but there's always going to be, a lot.
Yeah, things to work around.
Oh,
One last question, if you don't mind clarifying for our church community. You mentioned a gala that you're involved in.
Oh, yes.
I'd love for you to share a little bit about that, because I think your work there is absolutely fabulous.
So the gala, it's called Mi Amor Gala. Its meanings in English, my love gala. So it's hosted by 2 marvelous women that I had the chance encounter by God, probably they brought that I met them 4 years ago. So every time that they wanted me to partake in the gala, just timing was not right. But luckily, on the 9th year of the gala, and this year was the 10th anniversary, they kind of focus on assisting survivors of domestic violence, and sexual trafficking. So with the domestic violence, it kind of resonates. So everyone that's part of it kind of has a story. So yeah, I'm kind of helping and being of service in any way, shape, or form I can with those that survive domestic violence themselves. And
what do they do in the gala?
And the gala,
That's very.
it's the runway. Yeah, the runway of hope. So they kind of, prepare these ladies that survive domestic violence for like 6 months, like coaching and retraining their brains and making them feel important, confident, building the self-esteem. And then they make them wear this beautiful dress, which they're in their lifetime. It's like $1,000 dress from a designer that was nice enough to, out of kindness, they just make them feel beautiful. So we kind of highlight their stories, and they just do the runway of hope to share with everyone that it doesn't matter where you're coming from, what background you have, we are all in this together, and we all could shine no matter what we endured in life. So yeah, that's kind of nice. Yeah. So what we do there. Yeah. Sorry.
You must have heard some amazing stories. And
too many. Never ending.
I have one other quick question to kind of drill down on what I was saying earlier. Based on your being a doctor, based on your being also with this gala that you're doing,
and research,
when people come to you for advice or counsel, and they're in dangerous situations, so your advice would be forgiveness. But what's the bound? How do you advise people when it's time to say goodbye? First of all, if it's violence, you want to get them away, right? You want to get them to a safe place. So that's obvious. And forgiveness, but how do in your case, you stayed in the house. I don't think your dad was abusing you at that time. Okay.
Thank God he kind of just,
pardon me?
Thank God he did it there.
Right. So what's your advice to somebody who comes to you and says, and abuse doesn't have to be physical abuse, it could be mental abuse. So what's your advice as, now as both as someone who's kind of weathered it, has a spiritual life, but also as a medical professional? When do you say just snap hard. Like Jesus said, snap your sandals together? Sometimes.
Right.
And
that's a hard thing to do, to tell them at the time, because they're still in fight or flight mode. Um, but you just look into their eyes and you kind of know, how to guide. Like, are you ready to break free? That's what they kind of tell them. Are you ready to break free? Are you ready to feel like a burden lifted? Are you ready to let go of that story that does not serve you? No, no, now. Um, I tell this to myself as well, because I also been in relationships that I'm like, why am I in this cycle?
Mhm.
Uh, so I even to myself, I look in the mirror and have that conversation to myself. Like, is this serving my highest good? Is this, do you feel good about yourself? How do you feel after that encounter? That's what I tell them and I tell myself, because sometimes you have it in your DNA and you repeat relationships like that, and you're like trying to figure out, why is it that I'm attracted in this situation? But by forgiving, it kind of helps you release that shackle, release, detangle that scenario that already happened, so you can change your story and see it from another perspective and say, it's okay, it happened, but there's a new beginning for you. This is not your end game. Yeah,
So forgiveness is a very powerful way to break the cycle.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think that's the best recipe. And love, and send love. I tell myself and I tell others, I mean, everyone has crazy stories of domestic violence, and broken teeth, their disfigured face, or barely eating, or chained to a bed, or crazy stories that you're like, wow, I've seen that only in movies, but I mean, it does exist. And the worst neglectful situations, but sometimes you got to say no. If you want to free yourself, send love and send forgiveness, because that's the only way you could release yourself, literally. So yeah.
Now Cheryl's asking, when did you have professional help like a therapist? Did you have professional help like a therapist through any of this?
Oh yeah, during my divorce, when my parents divorced, I had to, because I was in medical school. My boyfriend at the time left. I was bullied also during medical school. Physicians like to kind of hit people, like to build up grit. So I had a therapist. I did go for at least 6 months. I did speech therapy. And I also they wanted me to check my ears because I was talking so loud, because I've always been a person that speaks my truth. I'm really loud, really vocal. They wanted me to go to therapy for that as well. So I did acupuncture, I did massage, I exercised like crazy. I decided to eat good, because when you're in medical school, you eat junk food sometimes, you eat hamburgers, Taco Bell, whatever you find, because you don't have time to even cook a meal or have someone to give it to you. So yeah, there was a lot of process. Even when I was studying for the boards, the same situation happened. I had to also recur to therapy. But my therapy, to be the best therapy that I did by myself, was to go to church every time I would break down by myself. And yeah, my mom was like, she knew. Like, sometimes I would just leave the house and I'm like, yeah, I'm just going for long walks. And I would just go to a random church and just cry. That was my therapy. And read scriptures. Yeah.
Thank you. And Cheryl writes, thank you for that, for sharing that.
Yeah.